What I will say about Jerry Jones when it comes to his silence over the last 109 days, I found his rhetoric yesterday to be disappointing because it was just, it was just all over the place. I don't know what the hell he means by grace. I don't know what the hell he was talking about. And it's rare that we listen to Jerry Jones and we don't get something definitive from him. Whether you like his position or not, you know specifically where he stands. And it's usually about him and not about anybody else. And that is where I really jump off the rails, as I was explaining to Ryan Clark on Get Up just a little while ago. The reality is very, very clear to me. If Jerry Jones acted of his own volition, if he just said, hey, this is how I feel and this is my position, guess what? I don't care whether we hear from Jerry Jones or not. He has the right to be silent. He has the right not to say a damn word. He has the right not to speak on a plethora of issues that have been ravaging our society over the last few months. Fair enough. No problem. The problem arises when we're talking about Jerry Jones, who not only took the position that he wouldn't be someone who kneels, but that his players wouldn't do so as well. The only time modification kicked in was when the president of the United States, Donald Trump, said he fired all those sons of bees. That's when Jerry Jones and the players took a knee on Thursday Night Football in unison with one another to say we're more than just that. We're human beings. We're not just football players. We're human beings. We have feelings. We have emotions. We've dealt with a lot of things throughout our nation's history. It's unfair, and for you to label us like that, Mr. President, we really have a problem with you. And that is the only time that Jerry Jones took any kind of took that position rather. Now, with this particular situation, since George Floyd's passing, 109 days have passed. We hadn't heard a word from Jerry Jones. There was an APB out for him, figuratively speaking, disseminated by me personally, because we needed to hear from him. And the only reason I felt emphatic that we needed to hear from him is because this guy, who has been a magnet for the camera, has been very, very conspicuous on behalf of himself and the NFL ever since he arrived in the late 80s. This guy suddenly was hiding. And I'm saying, wait a minute, when you dictate the actions of an abundance of players, now that's a problem. You don't get to be silent then. You have to come out and speak out and let us know where you stand, because you've been controlling their actions. And Jerry Jones came out yesterday, and as far as I'm concerned, said pretty close to nothing.
Yeah, if we're trying to figure out what's in Jerry Jones's heart, like divine what's in his heart by what he says, that's futile. It doesn't matter. The Jerry Jones wants to know the answer to one question: where's the money at? And once he knows the answer to that question, you will hear his stated beliefs reflect what he thinks the answer is. His stated beliefs. I'm sure he has. He doesn't seem to me to have any deeply held beliefs. I'm sure he has preferences. He may prefer one thing over another, but not so much, not so deeply held, those ideas or those beliefs, that he's willing to lose $1 over them, right? About most issues, it seems to me, he's agnostic in that sense. Whatever his preferences are, where's the money? Early on with Kaepernick, he intuited, I think, as many did, that the money is not with Kaepernick. The money is with the kind of anti-Kaepernick sentiment. That represented a bigger pocketbook than Kaepernick and his supporters. So he was against it. Then that started to change. The scales started to balance. And so he thought, okay, what can we do? So he knelt with his players, but was still on the fence, right? Because you want, and now that it seems that the Kaepernick contingent, maybe the majority at this point or close to it, he's stuck. His preferences may reflect the mainstream, what was once mainstream, but he will ultimately make decisions based on what is actually mainstream and what alienates the fewest people possible. He wants the biggest tent possible to patronize his product, because that's what he seems to actually believe in, the almighty dollar. And as you said, Stephen A., he's a businessman. And so, what are we to expect something else?
I hear you. But in some instances, you still have a right to articulate that position, although it's incredibly, incredibly obvious. And I think this is one of those times. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, the reality is we saw, social justice issues, protest, and the like going on throughout this nation. This nation had definitely taken an extreme turn. There is no question about it. We've heard white folks across the nation talk about, we're listening. We want to hear you. We want to learn more about this. We haven't listened enough. We haven't paid enough attention, et cetera, et cetera. We heard those things. While all of that was taking place, while an entire nation was transfixed on this issue, Jerry Jones went AWOL. He was missing in action, period. And so what I'm saying is now we're looking at other guys. We're looking at guys wearing those Dallas Cowboy uniforms that have a profound impact on a lot of young minds and beyond out there. It's the #1 brand in football. It's arguably the #1 brand in sports. They represent this franchise, and they work under the stewardship of Jerry Jones. We've heard a lot of players taking positions. We've seen a lot of players protesting, et cetera, et cetera. But where have the Dallas Cowboys been? And when we ask that question, it's not to imply that they're not doing anything behind the scenes. I'm talking about conspicuously in front of the cameras where everybody can see and identify who they are and, more importantly, where they stand. We haven't necessarily received a definitive answer in that regard, and we know the person to point the finger at for that being the case. It would happen to be Jerry Jones. So if you finally come out of the dark in 109 days, and when you finally speak, how are you going to speak in a fashion that's completely and the antithesis of what we've known you to be throughout your career as owner of the Dallas Cowboys, spanning more than 30 years? All of a sudden, we're seeing somebody totally new that's a bit ambiguous, lacking definitiveness. That's a problem.